Okay, so what we're going to do is look at silences and gaps and what you need to be able to do for your monologue. So remember that you are filling a gap or a silence. Gap is something that has been left out of the film. So something we haven't heard about, but we fill it in by making assumptions of what might have happened. So, for example, after Max leaves his mum, he then appears at Hans and Rosa's house. The gap is what happens to Max in between abandoning his mum and finding his way to Hans and Rosa's house. So you could fill in a gap here by being Max and reflecting on what happened to you along the way. So it is imaginative, it is creative. You are to make up a story that fits in line with the themes and the ideas of the actual film as well as the character. So you have to think about, well, what are the themes in here that I want to link back to? Do I want to link to resilience? Do I want to look at fear, scapegoating? Do I want to look at books and the importance of words to Max, for instance? Maybe what gets him through is he starts writing about his experiences while he's in hiding, something like that. So those are gaps. Gaps are places where the reader is expected to make the connections between one idea and another. The gap is what I want you to fill. You can also do a silence instead. So this is where somebody we don't hear from, it's left out. So for example, Rosa. Rosa is presented as a very staunch, strong woman who can be a bit cold hearted and she's a bit of a tough nut to crack. You might decide you want to be her shortly after Hans is taken for conscription to go into the army and where she's sobbing at the counter. So you can see she actually does have feelings a lot revealed in the film, but she never expresses them. So you could be her and express them. Now, remember your monologue, you are reflecting on 2 to 3 different events or situations that you might have gone through. So you are better to set your monologue towards 3/4 of the way or almost towards the end of the film, because the later you set it, the more you have to reflect on. Remember, a monologue is like you were to press pause on the film, pull the character out of the film, and ask them for 4 to 6 minutes to tell you their thoughts and feelings at that point in time about what has already happened in the film. So the character won't know anything that's to come in the future. They only know what has happened to them in the past. So you have to be very particular as to where you want to set your monologue and then what are the 2 to 3 things that you're going to reflect on or think about that have already happened to you. You can be imaginative and creative, but it must link to your knowledge of the character and your knowledge of the film. So it has to actually fit and be realistic. So this PowerPoint is actually available on the Andy page for you as well. So if you have a look on your Andy page, there is a assessment resources. It'll be in there for you too. So a monologue, as we already know, it's a speech delivered by a person expressing their inner thoughts and feelings. Okay, so it's like they are expressing what is going on in their head from their perspective. So it is first person. I can't believe, I'm so hurt, I wonder why, those sorts of statements. A lot of rhetorical questions in monologues because as we think, you have self questioning happening. Thoughts as well are not always complete sentences. So if you want to have like a half a sentence to indicate indecision or you're chopping and changing from one idea to the next, you'll use the ellipsis, which is the dot, dot, dot. Okay. You might be quite panicked. So you've got rambling sort of thoughts. So you might use run on sentences for that. But the key is to vary your sentence structure and your use of grammar. So don't just ramble on the whole way. Ramble for a long sentence and then use 3 short, sharp word sentences to sort of make the difference between them. That's where you'll get your discerning in your grades there for your grammar section. So you need to make sure that you choose the right character. Okay, so choose a character that you can put yourself in their shoes, that you connect with, that you would be able to give thoughts and feelings to that are realistic to them. You can choose any gender you like. Just make sure that when you're presenting that you're doing so in a serious and appropriate manner. So, elements of great monologues, things that make or break a really good monologue or not. So, a lot of the time, your character has to have a purpose. What is the purpose of the monologue? It's not just because I'm telling you to write one, it's because your character has to work through something. A lot of the time, it's working through some sort of emotion, some sort of conflict, some sort of want or motivation. So, um, something has to be urgent or critical, or a thought or a feeling or something like that needs to be worked through. It needs a purpose. Your monologue needs to be clear. Okay, it shouldn't be confusing when it is performed. I should be able to follow what is happening in your train of thoughts. So if you're unsure as to whether a part of your monologue works or not, best thing I can tell you to do is to read it aloud to yourself, the entire monologue. Does it make sense? Does it come across as thoughts and feelings? You might even like to film yourself reading it and then watch it back and see whether it actually makes sense. Okay. You need a hook opening. So start in the action, engage your reader from the start. Don't be boring, just get straight down to the nitty gritty of it. A button ending. This is basically ensuring that we know that the monologue is over. Okay, it needs to have some sort of sense of finality or resolution, some sort of satisfying conclusion, or you're about to go and do something, or you've resolved something. Remember though, it's 4 to 6 minutes. So if you are going to be a character who is working through your feelings about a death of or a loss of someone or something like that, don't start by grieving and being distraught and upset, and then 4 to 6 minutes later you're completely over it. It's unrealistic. Okay, you wouldn't get over a death or a loss of someone in 4 to 6 minutes. You can work through the grief, and you might then decide that you want to come to the conclusion that you are going to get up off the floor and put one foot in front of the other and live one day at a time or something like that. But it needs to be a very small resolution or change if it comes to grief. You wouldn't go from grieving and being really upset to then suddenly being like, all right, okay, I'm over and I'm going to go and plan the funeral now. It's not realistic. So you need to make sure that your reader feels empathy. This is where I want relatable thoughts and feelings. And you can do that using some great description. Use some imagery if you can, as long as it relates to your character. So if you're Rudy, Rudy is very young. He is very blunt and straightforward. He's quite naive. He asks very childlike questions and has very childlike statements. So don't go and make him Shakespeare, because he's not. Be authentic to the character. Make sure that when you're presenting, you own the space, okay? So make sure that you actually use your props, you use the room. If you're sitting on a chair, there's a purpose. You're standing up, walking around, making gestures. So your physical presence is actually in the room. You're in a way sort of acting and doing the actions that you'll put into it. And also make sure that you capture your character's voice, what is unique to them as a character. All right, so we've got a couple of options there. We've got, Ilsa Herman is a silenced character. You don't hear from her very much. You've got Max, who is a marginalized character because he's part of a group that's sort of been pushed to the fringes or the peripheral of society. So, you're welcome to choose either of those if you like. So here's a few reminders for your monologue. Sound like your character if you can, but don't put on an accent if you can't do it. Or if you're swapping genders, don't put on a silly voice that's not authentic. Just talk normally like a normal person does, okay? Disregard the gender of the character and just speak. Include at least one quote from the film. So I've got you to write some of those down during class. If you can't find any or you don't have any written down, have a look online, have a look on SparkNotes, go back through the film. I would recommend you watch it again and take some notes from that. Develop a concept throughout your monologue. So, is there a reoccurring theme? We've already talked about this, or a reoccurring motif? Any sort of symbolism that you can put in there. Books, for example, is a frequent symbol used throughout it. Theft is a frequent symbol used throughout it. Do not you narrate your actions. Please, I don't want to see any as I walk to the fridge or as I go here. If you have the phrase as I, delete it. Get rid of it. It makes it narrative and not monologue. Monologue is much more like a diary than it is any other text type. So even if it makes it easier for you, write Dear Diary, write your entire monologue, and then delete Dear Diary. Add actions. Include stage directions and make sure they're in brackets and bold, please, so I know what you're doing and when you're doing it. You can't go from sitting down to then suddenly you're standing over in a corner without the stage directions. You need to have them in there. Don't retell the story. You must reveal something that is realistic to the character in the context, a gap or a silence that hasn't been revealed. So don't tell me, if you're Rudy, how much you love Liesel. We know that already because that's been stated and shown extensively throughout the film. Give me something we don't know. The purpose of your monologue is for you to be the character and to reveal something about them. Reveal their thoughts and feelings. If you don't include thoughts and feelings, it's going to be very difficult to do well in this task. You must have some sort of emotional arc or growth, some sort of development for the character. When you are paragraphing, it's not just an intro, 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion, okay? You are paragraphing when you've got a change of idea, when you've got a change of thought, when you've moved to a new place, if you start talking about something else. They are all sections where you would have a new paragraph, okay? Ensure that you have the correct tense. You've got your sentence starters that'll help you for the beginning, which starts in the present. Then you've got sentence starters that help you transition to the past, okay? Because the first part starts in the present, you go into the past, and then you go back to the present again. The sentence starters will be critical in helping you to maintain the correct tense throughout. The present ones at the very end, in the conclusion of your monologue, actually have some sentences in there that will help you come to some sort of resolution. Also, make sure that you read your monologue, okay, and make sure that your writing is written as thoughts. So I want you to make sure that you are reading each sentence and asking yourself, would I think this? If you wouldn't think it as a thought, change it to a thought or get rid of it. Okay, so think about diary entries, how we write diary entries. They are mainly just thoughts and feelings. They're not narratives. All right, let's have a look. What else we got? Aesthetic features and devices that are needed. So, in order to satisfy that criteria, aesthetic features, you've got imagery, metaphor, simile. Don't make them too flowery. You're not Shakespeare. Just use them like you would in a normal way. Okay? We always speak in metaphors and similes a lot of the time in our general conversation. Do that in a natural manner, and I will give you some examples of that next week. Some spoken devices, which is the way that you are presenting and speaking your monologue. Okay, so the expression, the tone, the pace, the volume of your speaking. If you've got an accent, you don't have to do one, but if you can, great. Costuming and props, all part of the aesthetic features as well. So please actually do this. If you're not going to dress in costume, at least have some props. Use the props. Include some symbolism. Bring a book with you if you're going to be Liesel. If you're Hans, print out a picture of an accordion and put it onto some cardboard and bring that in. If you are Rudy, bring in a soccer ball. Those sorts of things actually count towards your grade. Stylistic devices is talking about the structure. So the characterization is important. Are you believable as that character? Have you used some repetition throughout your monologue to help you? Have you used a variety of different sentences, which we've already talked about? Have you stuck to the present, past, present structure that is taught in class? It's imperative you do that. Have you got stage directions, and is it in first person? Those are all requirements of the task, so you should be sticking to those. Now, on the end of this slideshow, we've got some monologue exemplars from some videos. They're a little bit older, but they are very short and interesting so that you can see how the internal monologue thoughts come out. So have a look at that. Also, if you go to the Andy page, if you scroll down, you've got resources for monologue assessment tasks. If you click on that, I've added a few more things in there. So you've got a basic planning sheet. You've got a scaffold. I don't mind if you plan in the scaffold. The scaffold really just tells you how it's set out. You've got sentence starters here to help you, which I've already gone through with you this morning. You've got a monologue checklist. We can look at that next week once you've already written your monologue. There's gaps and silences. I've written an entire list here, which will help you have a look at some of the things that you can reflect on. Okay, so you could pick 2 or 3 of these things, and as long as they are in the right period of time, or they're before you're setting your monologue and you're reflecting on those, then that is fine. I've got an exemplar monologue here from when we did risk. So if you want to have a look at what it looks like again, you're welcome to have a read through that. You've got a monologue information document as well, interior monologues, and what are they and how do I write them. So if you're unsure, you don't remember what we did last year, have a look through here. It talks about what monologues are, it gives you some examples. It talks about finding the right character, places in your novel, establishing times and places. Obviously, we're not doing novel, we're doing film, but it's the same thing. Developing dialogue. So what are they actually going to say? You don't use speech marks though, but what is it that they say in their thoughts? You got your theatrical elements, which are your stage directions and things like that. All right. And can you demonstrate your understanding of the film? It's very, very important that you do that. That is the task. So plenty of resources there to help you. You should be absolutely fine to, by the end of the lesson, have sorted out who you're going to be, where you're going to set your monologue, and then what other 2 to 3 things you're going to reflect on. So by the end of the lesson, I would really like you to have that sorted out. By the end of Monday's lesson, you're going to have a planning sheet all finished and submitted, ready to hand in to me. It is dot point only. If you are ready to start planning tomorrow, so Friday, then you are welcome to get started straight away. All right. Thanks very much. I hope that helps.